pleasure to meet you all. I can see you all on chat, and just really delighted today to give you an introduction to low-cost open source technologies, of which I've been essentially specializing in for the last few years now. So hopefully you can all see my screen. And essentially, I've spent about 11 years as a conservation technologist. I was based at the Zoological Society of London, as many of you on chat will know. Let me start my video. And today I wanted to give you an introduction to low-cost and open source conservation technologies. And what I'd like to ask first is what your first open source memory may be, because I think it's quite important to define what open source is to a number of people. My first open source memory was actually using a very old computer like this. And I remember I was about 10 years old, and my father bought this, and his idea was he was going to use this as a word processing computer. And he was delighted to buy this very expensive computer back in 1989 to do all his word processing on. But I realized that I could change the computer to do what I wanted to do. And if you went and edited a file called config.sys, you got a screen like this. And this was my first actual open source experience, because I realized I could change the computer, I could edit the configuration, and I could do something different. I could customize it. And I managed to get a game working on it. And as a 10-year-old kid, that was a very exciting thing to do. When my father went back to his computer, he could no longer get his word processor working. So he was quite upset that this expensive purchase didn't work, but I was delighted. And this really got me thinking about what open source means today, because to a number of us, it's often related to software, and it's related to an environment that you have the ability to change, edit, and customize. But in hardware and moving forward into conservation, this can be a very different space. And essentially, open source is sharing knowledge and it's celebrating impact together. And that's really important, that we celebrate impact together. A number of open source technologies haven't been too successful due to the fact that they weren't inherently used by more than just a few individuals. And if we want to have impact, we need a number of people, large communities like the Wild Labs community to work together. And open source is about breaking down barriers to enable others to succeed. It's how can we share technology, knowledge, and impact and make sure that we succeed together. So importantly, where are we now? The big question. Well, for a long time, I started my open source journey looking at a device called a Mataki. And this was an open source wildlife tracking tag, so a biotelemetry tag. It was developed by a chap called Robin Freeman at the Institute of Zoology. And Robin made this tag and shared it openly under a BSD license. And it got far, but it didn't quite get to where it needed to be, i.e. a tool that was used by the many and had the support and background necessary for it to go on and be a successful tool. And there are a number of reasons for this. So looking at these reasons, I started my life as a Shuttleworth Foundation Fellow. So I took a break from ZSL and spent, well, now my third year as a fellow, looking at two goals. The first was to systematically open source the conservation technologies that offer the most value if they're made accessible and available to all. And the second, as many of you have put up on the question sheet, how can we develop a sustainable funding model to help support third parties of developers? So moving forward, I started developing open source tools. On the screen at the moment is an open source camera trap, which is used by Penguin Watch in Antarctica. This one's in South Georgia, watching over king penguins. And I've also been working with Wild Labs as well on human-wildlife conflict tools, specifically open source microbolometers for polar bear detection. And if you have a look at your questions, a number of you, when you aggregate them together, end up talking about the same issues: sustainability, business models, collaboration, cost versus quality, capacity and skills, and interoperability. And these are all valid, and it was great to see these questions come up. So what I've done is translate these into where we are now and how these questions are being answered in the open source community today. And essentially, on the left, open source platforms I think are really important moving forward. Collaboration, quality assurance, and skill sharing works really well in a platform space. And by a platform, I mean not just the open source software or the hardware schematics, but the support around the tool, the user interfaces, the configuration scripts, someone on the end of an email that will actually reply and say how you can do something in a different way. And it's really important to understand that platforms are going to be essential if we're going to have impact. And the second one, which is really interesting, I think, is a marketplace, a space online where we can actually work together to lower costs, become more sustainable, and it's a business model that we can all share and benefit from. So I went ahead and created the Arribada Initiative, which is spearheading both open source platforms and marketplaces. And today we now have the first biologging platform, which is completely open. It's called the Arribada Horizon. It started life as a sea turtle tag, and now that's been made accessible, and we're building in a configuration screen which will be open as well, so an app to configure it. And that is being used actively in the community now for others to build their own biologging solutions, their own tags, which they're now inheriting and adding extra functionality to. And I'll briefly go into that in a moment. And the second is the marketplace. And this is used by open acoustic devices at the moment. So that's the team from Southampton and Oxford, who built the very popular audio mufflers, many of you may know and have heard of. But if you look at the benefit of platforms, essentially a platform enables others to essentially inherit what you've done before them. So OpenCollar is a new initiative which popped up recently from Smart Parks. And they wanted to jump ahead, start at Z, not A, and have to put all that engineering and non-recurring costs in. They went and inherited the base platform, so the tag you see on the screen. They're now adding their own LoRaWAN extensions to it, Lacuna extensions, so they have satellite over LoRa, and that they make this thing work, they're adding to it, and they can now open that up themselves, and we have a platform which is beneficial to all. If you then go further and include WILDLABS, then you have an even larger basis where anyone who's on a thread or on a conversation or is using the platform online can be provided with any feature from this platform. Maybe they want to get involved as a software engineer, as a hardware engineer, or even as a bug tester. It becomes something that we all own. And moving forward to the marketplace, this one's a really interesting business model that a few of you may want to adopt in the future too. But essentially, we've been looking at group purchasing, and that means working with the WILDLABS community to advertise that a purchase is going to take place. And the reason for this is you can aggregate orders and bring the cost of those orders down astronomically. So you make a big batch of audio muffs at the same time, so the BOM cost, the bill of materials, is dramatically lowered. And what we did is we registered a community interest company, so legally we can pool the funds, the profits from these sales, and give them back to the original developers. So open acoustic devices get 80% of all of the profits made from the sale of these devices, so they can use it to fund themselves, their salaries, to support themselves, to pay for flights to go to conferences, or to essentially make audio muff too and support the device. And of course, we manage fulfillment and support, which is really important. Making sure that devices are shipped, that returns are dealt with, that support is available is vital if you're going to have a successful marketplace. And just to have a look at what this means in terms of costs, this is a chart here showing you what the total unit price is if you've got a single audio muff using Circuit Hub online today. And you're in the $850 range, which is really expensive. Now, one campaign on WILDLABS, which would get 100 people together to bulk buy those devices, gets you down to the $49.99 range, which is an astronomically big difference. And that's why this marketplace can have value. So what we want to do next is essentially open that up. So it's not just open acoustic devices using it, but all manner of open source developers can benefit from that as a service. And it's really interesting to be in this space. For a long time, I was always just developing devices, always working on the software and the hardware. And I realized that the service provision is actually the missing piece. For an NGO to sit in the middle and be the glue between the user and the actual developer was missing. So I've been focusing on that for the last 2 years now. And of course, the Arribada Horizon platform is already available now. OpenCollar are using it, and you can get access to the source code, jump right in, and basically support that as a platform. And of course, in 10 minutes, I've only got so much I can get across. If we had 2.5 hours, I would continue and go into a number of other projects. But I just wanted to wrap up with the delight really that this call is happening today, but we've actually have a number of people online, people I've worked with. So Joanna out in Peru working on all of the arboreal treetop systems, to everyone who's helped on the sea turtle tags, Iranas and Smart Parks and everyone, because it's only when we get together like this online and start to talk about these problems that we can really have an impact. We start to answer and address issues that fundamentally need us to work together as a community to solve. So a big shout out to Stephanie and Talia too for putting this together. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Alasdair. Before we jump on to David, did anyone have any questions they wanted to put to Alasdair? It was a really lovely introduction to open source and kind of shaping the discussion for later. Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to reply to that now?
Yeah, sure, why not?
So I know the Gosh community really well, and unfortunately I couldn't get to China because I had another commitment, which was a real shame. But there's actually another Shuttleworth fellow who is who's really involved in the Gosh community. And that's,
can I interrupt? What's the Gosh community for everyone else who doesn't know, including myself?
the Gosh community is about open source hardware.
Oh.
So they've been running for a very long time, pre-WILDLABS. So I remember I was on the first WILDLABS call when it was all started. Essentially, what I think we need to do is take communities that have already existed, who may not necessarily be in the conservation technology space, and bring them together, because it's not just about conservation technology. There's a lot of open source hardware development in the makerspace and in another, a number of arenas that haven't quite connected yet. We haven't really had like a global meetup where we see where the synergy is. I think that's important to look at.